Well, this little segment is for those of you who want to repair your Sega Game Gear. This is the audio board. I'm using some lead acid solder to help break up some of the corrosion. You'll be surprised at how the pads look after we do this, but before they're all just black and white and green. You name the color, it pretty much is in there. Be careful of all the plastic that's in here. You don't want to get this soldering iron right up against it. This one is a Weller WES51. It's got its own temperature control and everything on it, and I run it pretty hot just so I can get this solder to go down inside there. Sorry for all the smoke in your face there, but there, those pads cleaned up really nice. We didn't burn anything off like I've seen people do. I've done it a couple of times too. That's part of working with this stuff. It's going to happen. Now, just to show you, you notice how this hasn't even worked its way in yet because I didn't apply it very long. I just wanted to show you that. We scrub with our super solder wick. Costs $25 a roll, but when you're trying to preserve these things, it's worth it because it lasts forever. Well, unless you do as many of them as I do. So I've got 3 rolls just waiting in the background just so I can use them when I run out of this one. And sometimes it gets a little stubborn, so you have to work this solder wick along with the solder into the pad so it'll scrub and it will clean it up. And remember, the solder wick itself is hot and it will burn those as well, so be very careful about it and make sure that you cool it off. Don't grab it with your hands either. Alright, notice how we keep continuing to drag that across. Now, one of the key things is you got to realize that you see this is all full up. We need to get some area, so we cut it with our snips. Wipe our solder iron on the sponge, that little sizzle you heard, if it could be detected, and come back in here again. Remembering that we want to scrub these as we go and not burn the plastic at the same time. I don't know if you could see that, but it was kind of dark in there. Sorry for bumping the table. It's going to be a stubborn one. I might have to reapply. Don't apply it too long in one area. That's why we're scrubbing. Otherwise, you're liable to burn the pad loose. You'll have the solder wick grab a hold of a corner and it'll just pull it. You don't want to do that. And I don't like breathing in the solder fumes, so I'm always blowing. So if you hear that little puff every once in a while, that's what I'm doing. I'm getting a little fresh area here so I can get this. And as you can see, it looks like it might have actually gotten it that time. Yep, look at that. So sometimes reapplying just a little bit more of the acid core once you've scrubbed it once will help it again. And don't use the acid core to solder with, and remember to get as much of the acid core back off. As you notice, I do try to solder wick all of it off. And if you notice, I solder wicked a chip resistor off of there, so I've got to go back and get that. I don't find it on the back of my solder wick, then I'll just have to get me another one and put it in there. But that's one of the things you've got to be careful of too, is that your solder wick will pick up on your parts. Alright, well, continuing on, and we'll look for it later. We'll get a new one. Just want to show you how this turns out. And we'll clean it up with some isopropyl when we're done. So far they're coming out pretty good, even though we had some pretty nasty pads here. And this one's gonna need to be trimmed again. Now remember, this thing is pretty hot, so be careful when you're trimming that not to grab a hold of where it's hot, because that solder might still be molten. Especially if you run the soldering iron as hot as I do. Going to turn it sideways so that I can get in here without pushing up against the connector too much. We're going to hit that with a little bit more solder because it's not coming out of there as clean as I want it to. Clean the solder tip. Trim our solder wick one more time because it was kind of spreading out on us and I don't like it when it does that. Can't scrub too well. So I cleaned that one up pretty good. Now let's see how it did on this one. Now it takes the green insulating layer sometimes too because it will burn it. So if it comes loose, that needs to be covered up if you want to protect it from other things touching it and shorting out. Alright, so now we're going to clean this with some isopropyl and a toothbrush. We like to use 91% or more. We rinse our brush off in there, get the excess off, come up in here, pre-wet it a little bit with this, and wherever we've got the flux, we're going to scrape it just a little bit to loosen it up. And yeah, we got a little bit of flux on the back side here because it cooks it off and it adheres to whatever is nearby. But it cleans up nice. So, as ugly as it looks right this minute, when we get done cleaning this, you're going to be amazed. And you can do this too if you just take the time to do it and be patient. As long as it took for this video to happen is how long it should take you minimum just to clean up this front side of this board. And don't forget, they have old solder rosin on the other side of this board that's just all over the place. It's caked on there usually. A lot of times I'll pre-clean them before I get started on the top side because it's so sticky and I don't like to touch it. But we saved it. Look at how awful this is on this side. We're going to use a little vinegar to break up some of the corrosion on this side, and then we're going to hit it with a wire brush at the same time. Then we'll hit it with alcohol. So let's get this in here. Rinse our brush out. Shake it off a little bit. And voila. Nice and clean.